All right. Hey, family. Welcome to Colonial Outcasts, the outlet for all things that disturb the intricately designed system of abuse and power that we all live in. I'm Mark. It is August 29th, and Israeli terrorists are currently launching an assault on the holy cities within the West Bank as we speak. Today, we are going to be taking a journey through the context of an inspiring man, in my opinion, Emad Deen, a Palestinian American who authored an autobiography, The Jerusalem Gangster, and a book about his homeland, My Land is Palestine. Emad is a very powerful voice on the subject of Palestine with a very unique life story, which gives his perspective even more power and inspiration due to its unique nature. Issues that we would not expect to be intertwined, but yet it illustrates how unpredictable and dynamic this world is. This is an episode that I've long anticipated since I met Emad on TikTok Lives months ago as I watched him debate Zionists with a fierceness and justified rage that represent his people who are suffering in unimaginable torment as the Israeli death machine marches on in its efforts to erase the memories of an ancient people from its land. What's striking about Emad is that he pulls no punches when it comes to standing up for his people, and he also lives by a die-hard code of honor that I rarely see in most Americans. This may have to do with the environment he grew up in and his life's journey from his birth in Al-Quds, Palestine, also known as Jerusalem, having an abusive father, a strong and faithful mother, immigrating to the United States, getting involved with Chicago gang life in his early teens, and eventually being incarcerated into our sadistic prison system, which, like the prison state of Israel, needs to be completely gutted. And ultimately, him coming to Islam and how that changed his life and goals while also empowering his sense of morality and justice when it comes to his fight for Palestine. Emad, thank you for coming on, man. How you been?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate this. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on here with you.
It's an honor to have you, man. I'm a huge fan. You're a very powerful person. You have a very powerful voice. And reading your book simply leaves you a different person after reading it. It also covers so many aspects of the human condition and the causes of suffering in our world, from abuse, both on an international and domestic level, to greed, to corruption in our criminal injustice system, to survivalism, to tribalism, to finding faith in internal redemption and direction. So you were born near the walls of the old city in
Yes.
1966 when Jerusalem was still governed by the British. And then about a year later, the Israelis invaded and expanded to the rest of historical Palestine during the Six-Day War. Your father fought in the resistance and was captured and tortured, right?
My father, actually, I was born in August of 66, and in June of 67, the so called Israelis took the rest of historical Palestine. We were still, a lot of people don't realize we were still under the rule of the British, although there was some so called, at the time, some type of military presence by the Jordanian, but it was, slim. Um, and my father was actually more my uncle than my father was. But at that time they were starting to resist. Um my father was captured, imprisoned, tortured. My uncle was exiled at that particular time. Then my uncle came back through Jordan, was involved in a firefight in the desert. Uh, Three individuals were killed in the firefight. One was injured, and he was captured with my uncle. My uncle was sentenced to 125 years in Israeli prisons for his role in resistance. The other individual who was injured uh, succumbed to his injuries and passed away. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I
That's up.
muted myself. So you and your uncle, I'm assuming, passed away in Israeli captivity.
No, actually, my uncle did from 1968, 67, late 67 to 1986. He was traded for him and 99 other guys for an Israeli pilot that was shot down over Lebanon, over
Hmm.
Beirut in 1983. So he was released in 1986 and was exiled to Syria.
Okay, gotcha.
There's a long story, but he's passed away now. He's buried in Gaza.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So prior to 1967 Six-Day War, and I
Hmm.
realized that you weren't even 1 years old yet, but
Yes.
I'm sure you were told the stories of the reality of what it was like under British rule.
Yes.
What was that reality like? I don't think a lot of people are aware of that.
No. One thing people don't understand about the British and what the British's role in the land of Palestine was. The British basically occupied Palestine after the Arabs revolted against their Islamic ruler, rightful Islamic ruler at the time, which was what we call, you guys know, as the Ottoman Empire. It's not an empire, it's a caliphate, because an
Mhm.
empire is run by an emperor where rule is passed down from father to son and so on and so on. This is an elected individual, and it's actually a religious rule. This is why you get the term Khalifa. Uh,
Mhm.
so the Arabs revolted, crushed the Ottoman rule, and were betrayed by the British. So the British, basically, their job, many people don't realize it, was to pave the way for the creation of the so-called state of Israel. They made sure that the Palestinians had no weapons. We were under occupation, imprisonment for anyone who resisted, while the newly arrivals from Europe, these Ashkenazis, these Zionists, were being armed, and the British made sure that the Palestinians were definitely unarmed. So they made sure they paved the way for them. That it was kind of, by the time it was all and said, by the time it was all said and done, it was like taking candy from a baby.
Mhm. It's interesting when I was researching kind of like the details of 1947, 1948 Civil War. I had read that a lot of the British, and it tends to be an effect that happens to colonizers. There is a certain dynamic that happens with colonizers where sometimes the grunts, let's put it that way, the grunts of the colonizing force tend to fall in love with the culture that they're colonizing.
Mhm.
And as a result, sometimes, rare, but it happens that these grunts join the resistance and they break away from the empire and decide to join the subjects of the colonization and fight against the and fight for them and basically assimilate in their culture. This happened with certain British soldiers where they just fell in love with Palestine, because Palestine just has that effect. I always tell people that when you're in Palestine, you fall in love with it, even if you were originally sent there to hate it. Sometimes you just fall in love, and a lot of that happened to, I believe, at least on record, 200 British soldiers who
Mhm.
fought the Zionists
Mhm.
in the 1948 war, which I found to be really, really interesting. And we call those types of soldiers colonial outcasts because
Mhm.
they
Exactly.
were originally part of the colonizing force, but
Colonization.
it happens though. We saw it with the Native Americans. Um, American U.S. soldiers uh, would go and assimilate with the Native Americans and become part of it. It happened in Palestine as well. So I always found that to be a little interesting little tidbit of information when I was researching 1948. So moving on from there. Okay, so you're born in 1966. About a year later, the 1967 Six-Day War breaks out. Now, um, Jerusalem is now occupied fully by the Zionist Israelis
Yes, all of
and all the
historical.
rest of the territory. Yeah.
Yeah, all of historical Palestine is about 22% left. They took the 22% that was left, which was Gaza and what we call West Bank and East Jerusalem.
What was the noticeable difference between the rule of the British and the reality after the Zionists took over?
Uh, the rule of the British, you know what? I'm not too much familiar because I was young, but I will tell you this: uh, the British, in some cases, were just as brutal. The only difference is, just think of their mindset. We're only here to help establish this nation. Once this nation is established, we're out of here.
Mm,
So they were kind of like the caretakers until the Zionists were well enough and strong enough to take everything over. Because I'll tell you what happened. From my grandfather, my grandmother, and my mother, Palestinians went to sleep. Ample British soldiers in and around East Jerusalem and within the areas there, mainly Eastern. Wake up the next morning, there isn't one British soldier left.
Mm.
So there's nobody there, but some Jordanians who have some arms, and this is when the so-called Israelis come in. There wasn't nobody there to fight them. My dad and my uncle, I heard from my dad, they were using World War I British machine gun that broke a firing pin 4 times. They're out searching, trying to find a firing pin to use
Mm.
this World War I British machine gun. And they had them Stins, with the British submachine guns. With you
With
load.
the side magazine.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And they were junk. They were so old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the Palestinians had nothing to fight with. And here comes the so-called Israelis who have been uh, building up since the time they got there. This is how they killed. Assassinated Izzuddin al-Qassam, uh, I- um, which the military wing of Hamas is named after. He actually found barrels that had supposed to contain food, but they contained submachine guns and ammunition. And when he
Hmm.
saw that, they unalived them at the port of Jaffa. Uh, and so not only that, they
Oh, by
actually.
the way, you don't have to use TikTok friendly language here. You can say
I
die.
know, isn't that something you could start?
Is it?
Yeah,
I know, bro.
yeah,
I know.
yeah. It's
Dude.
crazy,
I
man.
was
It's
using
crazy.
TikTok friendly language in my everyday life, like
Yeah, me
almost.
too. On a
It's
phone
bro.
conversation, it's crazy. But anyway, so they killed him, and this is where the resistance all started. This is when the realization came to the Palestinians that these people were here to steal our country, and resistance started. But not only that, but look at this. They brought in actually 25,000 well trained soldiers who fought in World War II.
Mm.
They collected 25,000 Jewish soldiers that fought in World War II and brought them down and established a military. Now, think these guys fought in World War II. They were
Hmm.
well trained, well armed against the people who had nothing. The Ottomans had fallen. There was no military. They talk about 5, 6 uh, Arab countries went to attack them. What Arab countries? What military did they have? The Ottoman Empire had just collapsed. These nations were being born fresh, and they were still colonized. They were still the French, the British. So it's all just propaganda, and
Yeah.
it's just lies.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you know, with my story, I grew up, being fed Zionist propaganda, and Israel's birth, so to speak, was mythologized as being a David and Goliath, with the Israelis being outnumbered, outgunned, and somehow miraculously they were able to fend off their enemies. And it's and of course now you look back on it and you realize that those were very intentional stories of propaganda and and mythology designed for the evangelical community here in the United States, so that they could believe that Israel was miraculously defended by God, as opposed to Western financing and even Soviet financing, that the Soviets actually armed the Israelis as well.
Of
And
course,
they were using the best weaponry at the time. They were heavily funded as compared to the Arab League. And they were well trained with plenty of ammo, and it was not a if it was a David and Goliath, then they were the Goliath, and
almost
the
definitely.
Palestinians and the Arabs were David. So
Yeah,
it's something that not a lot of people are aware of, especially if you don't grow up evangelical. Where a lot of people, I try to always educate the audience about what the evangelical propaganda looks like from a very young age in church.
right.
So I try to give that reference, but I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah,
All right, we got a lot of ground to cover. As you can see, here's your book, and
yeah.
here's my notes. And I even what I do is whenever I do and what I always staple a notepad on the page to write my notes to kind
Mm,
of follow along, especially in something like this.
mm,
I'm that was like the first page of your book. I'm moving on just to the second page real quick.
mm, mm.
Um, You said something interesting here. This is this has to do with I believe that your dad, after he was put in prison, your grandfather went to go visit him, and they would play a lot of games, bureaucratic games, when you would try to visit your relatives who were in prison.
Yes.
And so while your grandfather was waiting at the police station for your dad, while sitting there, he heard screams, moans, and the sounds of men being beat coming from the rooms down the hall from where he was seated. It was no secret by now that Palestinians were being tortured by the Israelis during interrogations. There was mass imprisonment without charges. Beatings and torture was part of everyday life for the people of Palestine living under Israeli occupation, and it did not matter if you were a Christian or a Muslim. Um, so torture it has and always been and always will be the nature of um, the Israeli system. And my question to you is, and you're very open about this in the book, so I feel comfortable talking about it. Your dad was abusive.
Yeah.
He was an abusive father.
Yeah.
And your
Very.
mother was a shining light of strength for you growing up.
She
And
sure was. Yeah. She
from
sure was.
and reading about her, it's just she reminds me of my mom. Like I felt connected to your mother when I was reading your book, and an
Right.
amazing woman, no doubt.
Yes.
But my question is, the abusive nature of your father, was it before this happened to him, or is it was just his nature, or I'm just trying to grapple if this was potentially a cycle of abuse with him, where because of his treatment by the Israelis imposed on him, the cycle of abuse works. You get
Yes.
abused, sometimes you pass that abuse down. Was that part of it, or I wasn't really clear on that?
I think the term is hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
People who are hurt, they hurt people. But I will
Yeah.
tell you this, and I'm gonna be honest with you. Uh, my dad is a pretty tough guy,
Hmm.
and he's very stern, very no nonsense kind of guy. Uh, and I believe as a Palestinian man who's remember now, I was born before I even understood what occupation was. I was occupied. So I wasn't even a year old when we became occupied. Hence, I become uh, basically I'm owned. All Palestinian society, Palestinians, lands, everything to deal with Palestinians is basically held hostage by the Zionist entity. So from the onset, my dad was constantly being picked up, tortured. I would see
Hmm.
him. He'd be gone 6 months. He'd be gone 8 months. He'd be gone a year, whatever the time was. And I believe that possibly the biggest part of it is uh, obviously the humiliation by the Israelis, the humiliation of the fact that we had no land and we were constantly being told that you can't assert your identity. If you assert your identity, you will be taken to jail, you will be tortured, you will be imprisoned, your family will be molested, your and whatever else we could do to you to teach you a lesson in order not to say anything about Palestinian. At the time, the Palestinian flag was outlawed. You better not get caught with a Palestinian flag near you, not even if you painted it on a piece of paper. You weren't allowed.
Hmm.
So you couldn't even say you're a Palestinian if you asked what your identity was. Regular abuses, regular arrests, regular abuses, whether it's verbally or physically. And I think it played a large part in the way he was. And I think he was just full of rage and he just, I think, unleashed it at anything that, whatever was closest to him. And I believe that was us.
That's. Thank you for clearing that up. That was my suspicion in reading that, because that content I read about the abuse that by the Israelis and the torture of him, but it was not clear to me whether or not that played a factor. So but I suspected it because of the cycle of abuse. Hurt people, as you said.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um,
I'll give you
it,
I'll give you an example. My grandfather, his father, whom I loved very much, was one of the kindest people that I had ever met in my life. My grandfather,
mhm,
Muhammad. My grandfather, and my grandmother, who are my dad's mom and dad, he never laid a hand on his wife. He never laid a hand on my grandmother. So it wasn't something that my father experienced in the house.
Yeah.
My grandfather was as gentle as a butterfly.
Hmm.
So I'm, to me, it's I believe the frustration, the anger, and imagine a man, all your dignity and everything is taken away. Some young kid from Europe who just showed up is stopping you in the street and frisking you and disrespecting you. He's able to be in the military. He's able to call himself what he wants. You can't do it. You really, when you think about it, if one of them wanted to come into your house and assault your family, you couldn't do anything about it unless you wanted to lose your life.
Yeah.
Imagine living like that. On
Yeah.
top of that, being arrested, tortured, uh, shipped from prison to prison. They play this game where they put a black hood over their heads, put them in military jeeps, and ship them from prison to prison where the family doesn't even know. They might have been in this part of the country today. They're gone the next day. And they usually do it right around visitation time to play
Hmm.
games with the family. You know,
Hmm.
it's a form of
Yeah.
torture in itself for the family and for the prisoner.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, but I thought they were a democracy, though.
Yeah. They're a democracy for themselves only.
Yeah.
You have to be of a certain class, a certain belief, and a certain religion too, and that is basically you have to be a purely Zionist uh, to 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 receive democratic uh, behavior, or democratic rules, or democratic laws.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how Americans, all this history, all these eyewitness accounts, they're just so suppressed for so long in the American eye, but so very real, generations beyond, from like your birth in 1966 onward. It's
Mhm.
fresh in the memory. It's fresh in your soul. It's
Oh yeah,
whereas us Americans, it's like a lot of us are like, wait, what? This has been going on? What?
exactly. Because
It's interesting.
it's been suppressed. It hasn't. It's not by chance that it's been suppressed.
Not at all.
It was systematic. It was a plan in order to suppress it. It's impossible to educate people about something and educate them correctly, and then at the same time support the villain that that you've just basically educated your people about, that they are the villains, that the rightful people of this land are the Palestinians, and that the invaders are these so-called Jews, these Ashkenazis, these Zionists. You can't educate them the right way and then at the same time support the Zionist entity. It wouldn't work. So
Hmm.
you hide everything. You use Hollywood. You use every possible way to be able to brainwash the people and put them to sleep on the subject. One of the things they've taught the people is these people have been fighting for 3,000 years. What could we possibly do to fix this? You know what I mean? The only thing that could fix this is the return of Jesus. So an ordinary person would say, those people, I've heard it so many times from Americans. Oh, you guys been fighting for thousands of
Yeah,
years. I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
what?
It's the stereotype
Yeah,
of like, well, it's just happening because it's the Middle East. What are you gonna do?
exactly.
But
Yeah,
it's and that's how we're raised to believe that the Middle East is just a shit show, and
yeah,
that's how it's always been. But the fact of the matter is, what's very interesting is the Middle East, under the Ottoman Empire, or the Ottoman Caliphate, as you
yeah,
put it, which is a good
yeah.
point you made,
Mhm.
is compared to Europe, it's very peaceful.
Oh, yeah.
Like Europe is what's been immersed in war and conflict only up until all the way up
And
until 19,
yeah. And
World War II.
colonization, yes.
World War II not is not that far away. So
No, it's not.
think of the embroilment of conflict and bloodshed that Europe hasn't been involved in all the way up until the end of World War II, and then of course what you have going on in Ukraine. I
Yes.
mean, so what, that doesn't count as so this stereotype that Europe is calm and civilized and everybody's
Yeah.
living happy and holding hands in the park and it's proper they're all drinking tea,
Yeah.
whereas the Middle East is barbarians fighting each other in hatred. It's not the truth. In fact, there's been this elegance in Middle Eastern culture that is still there to this day, that there's a code of honor that you don't have in places like Europe.
Hmm.
And I experienced that, especially like, for example, a great example of that is the Bedouins, right? Like
Hmm.
when you're hanging out with Bedouins to me represent a very ancient tradition that they still hold on to. I consider them, they're like the Amish of the North America, or they're, or the monks of other countries, or they live true to their ancient roots. And you see the mannerisms by Bedouins,
Exactly.
how
Exactly.
they live. It's very elegant, it's very proper, it has a code of conduct that you don't break, that you don't see in places like Europe. So like you said,
People with
it's
a lot
another
of
thing.
pride. As a matter of fact, the Arabs of the past used to give their children to the Bedouin to raise them to a certain age,
Hmm.
and then give them back to them. Remember, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was given to a Bedouin to raise
Hmm.
because of their strong ethics
Hmm.
and how they raised children. Prophet Muhammad's mother and father died when he was a child,
Hmm.
very, very young child. They gave him to a Bedouin woman to raise him, and she wound up bringing him back from an incident that happened. So you're absolutely correct about the Bedouin. They have a strong culture and strong sense of family rules and regulations, and I mean, they're definitely a strong culturally people.
And they're not governed. Nobody's governing them. Nobody's
Nomadic,
telling them to live that way. They're just
exactly.
doing it because. And
It's
I
been
spent
passed
some
down from
time.
generation to generation to generation, and it doesn't erase.
I love the Bedouin. I spent some time with the Bedouins in Jordan,
Yeah.
and it was a very special, sacred time. And just I got to meet their children.
Mhm.
I remember this little girl. This is in like Wadi Rum, Jordan, where the Lawrence of Arabia. And I was staying at a Bedouin family's, living in their tent, like under one of their tents, and got to sleep under the stars. And their Bedouin daughter was teaching me Arabic, and it was so sweet. She's like, one
Yeah, yeah.
wahad, and she didn't speak English. It was just so. It's a beautiful, beautiful culture, and
Amazing
I fell
stuff.
in love
Yeah.
with it. Yeah, I still have a picture of that. I'll try to insert it later.
Yeah.
Um, and one more note before we move on is talking about the other stereotype that is pushed in Western society about the treatment of women in a Middle Eastern culture. Now, I cannot speak for other Middle Eastern cultures in the other Arab nations, but I can speak for Palestinians in my experience. And I have never seen such sacred, respectful treatment towards women by anybody than more than the Palestinians did. The way that the females are such a protected treasure amongst Palestinians, and nothing tops the love that a Palestinian man has for his mother. Like you, like I when I was with the Palestinians, me saying the word motherfucker, right, for example,
Mm.
that was their trigger. And I was they didn't there was a language barrier there because they
Mm.
were translating that as, as disrespectful towards their mother. And I'm like, no, it's actually a different context.
Yeah.
But it they their love for their mother, and they actually taught me a lot of things about the respect of the mother, is that one of the things they told me was is that when you fall in love with a girl, you need to be very gentle in how you tell your mother that news, because to them it's like losing a son,
Exactly.
and that was something, different little things like that in Palestinian culture, that is had a big impact on me. So that being said, so
I do want
we'll
to. I do
yeah,
want to
yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah, go for
I
it.
do want to say that uh, from an American soldier after the Iraq War, he said, they made us believe that we're going over there to civilize a people who were actually civilized 5,000 years before us.
Mm,
Baghdad was the biggest city in the world. There was 1 million people in Baghdad. It was the place where they performed the first eye cataract operations in Baghdad. where most of what we have today from technology and understanding and medicine came out of Baghdad.
Hmm.
When the Europe was still in the dark ages until Andalus fell, when Muslim Spain fell, and they obtained the books, doctors, and scientists from the Muslims in Andalus, which is what we know as Spain. And it is said that when Muslim Spain fell, Europe came out of the darkness and into light. There's actually um, there's actually historical books that talk about. There's one an interview with a European woman who is recorded to having said that she hadn't taken a bath in 75 years. They didn't even know how to cleanse themselves. This is why they're rampant in
Yeah.
diseases and so on. So it was actually Islam and the Muslims who brought Europe out of darkness and into light. I just
Yep.
wanted to touch on that. If
Yep.
you want me to touch a little bit about the women, I don't know if you were done or you still had
No,
more.
no,
I
no.
just
Go. Hey, go wherever you want, man.
so the women in when you go to a Muslim society, the mother becomes the baby of the house. When the children start growing up, she becomes basically the princess of the house.
Yep.
Everybody caters to the mom. Mom is everything. She is the most respected. She is the most loved. She is the most cared for. The kids fight on whose house she's going to, who's going to feed her, who and she doesn't need to be fed. She's still young. She's still healthy. She still cooks. She wants to be a part of everything, but she's catered to in every way. In most cases, no one says there isn't a bad case here and there, but the based on Islamic culture, Islam has been there so long. But even among the Arab Christians, the mom is the same way. But we're so intertwined. It's almost difficult to tell us apart unless you see someone wearing a cross and someone
Yeah.
not wearing a cross, or going to the mosque or to the church. But a
Yep.
woman is I mean, the mother is sacred,
Yes.
sacred.
Yes.
And then people tend to think, oh, this thing. They People catch things like, oh, you guys marry four wives. Well, I'll tell you what. I lived in Jerusalem for 12 years. I don't think I've seen one or two people who might have divorced or he married two women. My grandfather had one wife. My father had one wife. My uncle had one wife. My other grandfather had one wife. Everybody I know only had one wife, unless it didn't work out and people divorced and then he wound up remarrying. But it's
Yeah.
not quite like that. And they make it seem like, everything becomes sexual in this world. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
could have four wives. Do they live in the same house? No, they don't live in the same house. It's not that type of party. This isn't Pornhub. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, very true. Very true. Um. The yeah, and going back to you're speaking of the dark ages. Yeah, it's such a skipped over fact, isn't it? When you think of the medieval period, with disease being rampant, they don't tell you about how it was just they burned knowledge. Anything that related to knowledge or science was considered heretic, and it
Exactly.
took the Moors, right? It was the Moors
Mm.
uh, that brought back common sense to Europeans, like bathing, uh, and just the preservation of knowledge. The Islam has always been a religion that values knowledge to the point that when they would take over a region, the first thing they would do is preserve the knowledge as opposed to burning the knowledge, and
Exactly.
preserving the culture rather than burning the culture. It was there to say, okay, we're here to protect the things that are valuable in this culture and learn from it, and then consolidate that knowledge. Like, and one of my biggest inspirations that I always take from, you talk about Baghdad, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad
Mm.
has been such an inspiration for me, because it was where Muslims, Jews, and Christians would get together and do religious studies and do
Exactly.
scholarly studies and so Muslims actually fostered the the culmination of Christian theology and Jewish theology and Jewish studies. So rabbis were able to study amongst themselves, and have that safe space to practice their religion, while Muslims protected and fostered that. And
Exactly.
so it's a
Exactly.
it's a
And these
it's
are
all out.
things, and these are things they like to hide, uh, and
Absolutely.
they like to. But you know, it's like anything else. You tell a lie enough times for long enough, it becomes the truth. And they vilified us, and they turned us into these savages. If you watch Popeye, even simple Popeye,
Mm,
Popeye beats up Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. Alibaba and the 40 Thieves were trying to grab Olive Oil by her hair and drag her like a caveman days. But I'll tell
yep.
you, as far as just to get back a little, give you a little bit about Islam and women. A person came to Prophet Muhammad and asked him. He said, "Who is dearest to me after God?" And he said, "Your mother." And he said, "And after that," he said, "Your mother." And he said, "After that," he said, "Your mother," 3 times. And then he said, "Who after that, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of God?" He said, "Your father." So he gives the mother 3 times after God, and then he gives the father on the fourth time.
Yep.
So I just want to kind of stress on that it is much of the stuff comes from religion. And Islam, for instance, does not is not an enemy to knowledge and science. You
Mm,
have to understand that even the names the stars have, those are all Muslim names, and they were named by Muslim uh, 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 scholars.
yeah.
So I mean, the birth of the star is in within Islamic literature. How a star is born, the stages that an embryo goes through is in the Sunnah. Uh, uh, there's so many things that uh, that God mentions about His creation that is factual. Now we find out the barrier. There's a barrier, an invisible wall, not between salt water and fresh water, but rather between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. They bump into each other at that opening by Spain and France, but they don't transgress each other. They hit each other and they go back to its own body.
Hmm.
The Atlantic goes back into the Atlantic, and the Mediterranean goes back into the Mediterranean. Prophet Muhammad mentions these things. This guy that couldn't read or write
Hmm.
1400 years ago is saying things that only now they're able to find out with telescopes and all this modern day technology. So that's the thing about Islam. And Islam does not look at learning and knowledge and science as an enemy, but rather it works together hand in hand with it in order to understand uh, things in life that God wants us to understand. And actually, God encourages us. But even within the Bible, God says, "Love your Lord with all your heart and mind." We know what heart means. That feeling you get when you see your wife or your daughter
Hmm.
or your mom or your brother. But what does it mean with your mind? That means I've created you with a mind to use and work and understand and know what it is that you're supposed to be believing in. That way, you don't go out and believe in nonsense. So I've given you
Hmm.
the ability to think, use your brain, use your mind, in order to know exactly what you're getting yourself into, and your surroundings and so on.
Yeah, it emphasizes the orchestra of all of these things working together for a prosperous life.
Exactly.
And like you said, meanwhile, while Muslims were preserving knowledge, the Vatican was burning people on wooden stakes if they were speaking about science, basic facts about science, like
Yeah. Look at the
you
witch
know
hunts.
the witch hunts. Yeah, it's
Yeah. How
fascinating.
many people perished? How many women perished? How many? And you could almost wipe out a whole village from one coercing her to start talking about others after the torture, and a bunch of innocent people went by. They were just decimated based
Hmm.
off of this witch hunt.
Yeah. So we're so you're born in Jerusalem. Um, Briefly, life. What was life was very tough in Jerusalem.
Sure was.
you, I believe you, right here, you were given the only means of survival as far as sustenance was 100 pounds of flour, sugar, salt, and a can of grease from the
Yes.
UN, United Nations,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
And you mentioned you were hungry at school all the time, and
Yes.
it was a constant strive for survival with you
Yeah.
under those conditions. And but however, you mentioned that prior to going to the United States, emigrating, you wrote something very powerful. It says, "If I knew then what I know now, nothing on this earth, and I mean nothing on this earth, would have made me leave Jerusalem. I had no idea that this day would be the last time I see Masjid al-Aqsa and the end of in the end of a simple but beautiful life, a life of real happiness, innocence, and purity. There would be no more playing soccer ball because in the 1970s it was not a popular sport in the United States. There would be no more climbing fig trees trying to find a branch that was best suited for making a slingshot in order to hunt small birds. Um, so you are now immigrated to the United States. What was the catalyst that you immigrated for? It was a relative, correct, that was living in the United States, and you moved there to for prospects of a life, and that was your dad's decision, correct? Did I cut off? You hear
You
me?
cut off for a minute. Yeah, you cut off for a minute. You were
Uh,
asking about the catalyst or something.
yeah. The what was the event that made that? What was the decision of moving to the United States? How did that come about? What
Well,
brought
here's the
that?
thing. So my dad left in 1973. He was after being constantly tortured. He's got 5 kids. His wife is pregnant. He's constantly being arrested and tortured. He can't raise his kids. We were living poorly. His sister was living in Puerto Rico. She's an American citizen. Her husband's American citizen. Her kids were born in Puerto Rico. They're all American citizens. So she had been fighting to get him out of there, trying to sponsor him to come to the United States. Finally, in 1973, he was granted that. That's that time he was tortured and his kidneys were infected, but he was able to leave. So he left to the United States in 1973, and we didn't see him from 73 to 1978. He had been, along with my mom, asking the U.S. government to allow his children to come into the United States. And in 1978, we received visas, permanent residency cards, which is the green card, but permanent resident, which is right under would be citizen, would be next after you go through the process. Uh, was granted for the 3 boys in 1978, and then the 3 girls in 1979.
Okay, so how
So
did
in
he
order
wind up
to
in?
unify the family, it had to come to the United States.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
And why Chicago?
that's where he was. That's where he
Who?
chose to go. I'm guessing my father. That's where he had been living since 1973. I think he had some friends here, and that was
Okay.
probably the best place to come at the time.
And he started his small store, a small supermarket, right?
A
Was that
small,
before?
small neighborhood store, small corner store.
And that was before or after you arrived?
No, no, that was after I arrived. That was in
Gotcha.
1980. I arrived in 78. In 1980, he actually worked as an engineer for Rockwell International in
Okay.
Amforge in Chicago. It was a division that built axles for American tanks and axles and wheels for rails for trains. He
Okay.
would fix
Okay.
the machines that press those.
Okay. Gotcha. And then he decided to branch off and be an entrepreneur to start his own corner store then.
For his wife and his kids while he's at work. Yeah.
So Chicago,
Most Palestinians were doing something like that.
yeah, yeah. So Chicago was a rough reality for you. What was your first impression of uh late 1970s, early 1980s Chicago?
I'll tell you what, when I arrived, I actually had heard that the streets were paved with gold, and I actually believed that. I swear to you, I believed it. I'm not kidding. I heard it all along from Palestinian kids who would go back and forth, and being poor, they say, "Oh, the streets there, they're made of gold," and I'm like, "Wow, I can't wait." So anyway, I get off the plane at O'Hare Airport, and I'm looking around, and we start driving towards home, and I'm looking at and I'm like, "Wow, this place is dirty. I thought the streets were paved with gold." Jerusalem is very clean,
It
and
is
I'm
very
looking
clean.
at the streets here, and I'm looking at the homes, and the homes are actually, when you start getting into some of these areas, they're made of frame, ugly looking frame. And then when you think about the homes in Jerusalem, they're built from limestone.
Hmm.
I mean, they're built
Jerusalem stone, they
up
call it.
strong. Yeah, to this day, they still build homes from limestone, the
Yep.
same way that they were built 2,000 years ago, or 1,500 years ago. And to
That's
see
why I'm
that,
in love with Jerusalem.
yeah,
That's why I fell in love with it. I visit when I first arrived at age 18. I there's you cannot overstate the beauty of Jerusalem.
oh
Like
no, you can't, man. You
uh,
can't. You can't.
it's
Actually, there's a thing called the Jerusalem syndrome. You
I
have
have it.
people that come visit it. They'd have to pick them up and put them on planes and get them out of there, arrest them and deport them. They have to chase them through the old city to try to catch them. They don't want to leave.
I didn't
Christian
either. I
Christian
went through that.
pilgrims, and yeah. It's real. That the Jerusalem syndrome is real. I mean, I'm a Palestinian. I was born there, and I'm sickened every day that I know I can't go there and see that. It's a hell of a burden to carry on your shoulders, man. It
And
is.
that's something you told me when we met on TikTok, where I told you I'd visit Jerusalem, and you were mentioning how you can't even go there. Here, me
No,
as a white, me as an American
yeah,
white dude can
yeah,
just visit it anytime I want, but you
yeah,
can't, and you were born there.
yeah,
And I met someone else like that who was born in Jerusalem. They couldn't go there. I met him in the West Bank. His name
yeah.
was Hytham, and he
Right.
was put in prison for 10 years because he spray painted some resistance graffiti.
Exactly.
And he told me that he's not allowed back in Jerusalem. I'm just like, man, that's just like
Yeah,
that. That is, yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
Apartheid, occupation, it's all, but it doesn't exist according to them.
yeah. So you arrive in Chicago, and what season is this? Is this like wintertime or is this
No, no.
summer?
Actually, I arrived in Chicago August 25th, 1978. I had just turned 12 years old,
Mm,
August 1st. It was my brother's birthday, I think it was, but we didn't know birthdays because we never celebrated birthdays. We didn't have anything to celebrate birthdays. That birthday was a day that came and went without any recognition. But it was August 25th, and it was nice summer. I'll tell you what, man, even though I talk about the dirty city, but I'll tell you what, it was unbelievable. I mean, the size of grocery stores, the size of streets, that cars, everybody has cars,
mm,
TVs everywhere. It was amazing, man. It was
yeah.
amazing. Imagine coming out of that, what you read about my life, from how we lived in Jerusalem to this. It was, actually, I think it doesn't do justice to you. Actually, it can corrupt you, in the sense that too much freedom that fast, from not having any, can play games on you.
It does.
Yeah, it can
Yeah.
play games on you to the point that you think you're just free to do whatever the hell you want, and it's not quite like that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I've I used to own a restaurant, believe it or not, back in the East Coast. It failed miserably, but I
Mm,
was around a lot of Arab and Afghani um, restaurant owners. And what's interesting about it is they came from obviously very strict Muslim background, and they
yeah.
got to the United States and they became alcoholics because
Wow.
of this abundance of freedom and temptation. And it happens, um, and that's and it happens, and it happens to their kids, and that's why it's very good to hold to your roots, no matter where
Exactly.
you're coming from. You got to stick to your roots. Roots are important. They're part of your heritage, and they're there for a reason. We have grandfathers for a reason. We have parents for a reason, to keep us rooted in where we come from, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, there's not.
um, so okay, so you arrive in Chicago. Now you're as you're there, uh, y- your dad decides to start open up a corner store. Again, the abuse continues, as you wrote in your book. It intensifies, and that plays a huge effect on where your life goes from there in many ways, in the sense that you had to find some type of alternative route because family life under your father was not the best, and
No,
it forced you to look for alternatives of I guess
I mean,
bonding.
yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, imagine, I'm the oldest, and there's two more boys. So my family is like kind of like the Brady Bunch. It's boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, all the way down.
Mhm, mhm,
Uh, so and I'm the oldest. And at the time, I was 12 years old. So you could imagine everybody else. And we united as a family or reunited, and it was a short-lived dream. It became a nightmare. Imagine sitting at a table eating dinner, and your father pulls out a 41 Magnum and puts it on the table and says, "Eat. As soon as you guys are done, I'm going to kill everybody in the house."
mhm.
Imagine that.
No.
And then get up and beat up your mom, and then beat you up, and then beat your sister up, and beat your other brother up, and all the way from the top to the bottom. It's it wasn't an easy thing, man. It was it wasn't easy. I had dreams of killing that guy.
Mhm,
And when I say that guy, people might not understand, because it's difficult for our people to hear somebody talk like me about their father, because most people, but your father is not like my father.
yeah.
My father was a guy who was a strong revolutionary, and he was the kind of guy you want to watch cartoons while your people are being occupied and put in prison and being killed every day. Don't you have any shame?
Mhm,
I mean, that's a quote from him.
yeah.
Yeah, shut up and sit down, or and he had no problem giving you a crack in the face, but not like a crack. But think about Mike Tyson swinging at Evander Holyfield and hitting him with that left hook or right hook across the jaw and across the
Mhm,
eye. I mean, black eyes and busted lips and bloody noses were the norm.
yeah. Yeah, that's why reading your book, I was a different person after I read your book. I went into your book a certain person, I came out somebody completely different, because and it made me very grateful. That's what, if there's a lot of effects your book had on me, but one of those things was gratitude. You know, um, it jolts. I know that the world's bad out there, and I know the world is bad for a lot of Americans, and but you don't.
And
Uh,
that's the
I'm
and
not
that's the
around.
whole and that's the whole idea of the book. That's exactly what the book is supposed to do. It's
Mhm.
supposed to teach fathers not to be like that. And it's
Yeah,
supposed to teach kids who have a decent life and have a decent father to be grateful and
yeah,
to understand, you know, what they can do in this life and how they can change things and how they can transform things, and not to whine about certain things if you don't have it as bad as that, or there's even people who have it worse than that.
yeah. Isn't that such an interesting thing about these new generations, like millennials, even Gen X and below, is that the stark difference between this new generation and the generation before us is that we're finally learning and putting a stop to the cycle of abuse. That's the new trend, and it's a very good trend that's
Yes.
happening. That just because you experienced abuse does not mean you carried it on. It's not a
No.
tradition.
No.
It's a fallacy.
Yes.
It's a hindrance to that. And like you said, your grandfather was a very loving man, a very kind man. So therefore, it's not a tradition.
No, it's
It's
not. And I mean, look at me, and even my brother. We grew up in a house where we watched beatings and we were beat and we were, but I've never beat a woman. I had
and you
friends in my
and you
gang
love your
like that
daughter
where
more
beat
than
up their
anything.
girlfriends. I mean, I've never beat a woman. I don't have a desire to beat a woman. I
Yeah.
don't. I it doesn't, so it doesn't necessarily mean because you've watched your father do this that you're going to repeat it.
Mhm. I'm grateful to say that I had the best dad I could ever ask for. My father was the perfect balance of a masculine man's man, and also being the most sensitive person to other people's feelings than
That's
anybody I've
great.
ever met.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that, and to real, but because I grew up that way, I've been somewhat sheltered from the reality of what people go through, like yourself, that who've gone through way worse. And I have to remind myself that the world. See, I grew up on military bases. I grew
Yeah.
up in safety. I, I, I could walk down the street and no problem. I could play with my friends. So I was sheltered in this kind of like almost like a fake world, sheltered by military perimeter and different facilities. And so it was not a it wasn't a very realistic. It wasn't.
Well, well, well. See, the thing is, it is realistic, and it's a part of the world, and it's
Mhm,
a way life is lived in some spots, in some areas, among some
mhm.
people. It doesn't
Yeah,
mean that it's wrong. It doesn't
yeah,
mean that it's bad. It just means that a lot of people should live like that, and it
yeah,
means for me, it's important for me to get my story out and my message out, so that way, hopefully, to say to you that thank God you didn't have to live like that, but there are others living a different way.
yeah,
Not that you know, to despise you because you lived like that, but I wish I had lived like that. I wish I
yeah.
had that type of life. And but at the same time, I you know, I thank God that He allowed me to survive all of that. And
Mhm.
sometimes I wonder, like I look at my brothers and sisters, and we don't have much dealings with each other. So there's that trauma, uh, and it's historical trauma. But I say, I wonder, I'm surprised that we're not all in nut houses, honestly.
Very good point. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is a wonder.
yeah,
Um, so growing up in that abusive household and watch having to see your mother get beat and cheated on, and seeing your siblings get beat, you looked for bonding in another way, which led to you joining a gang, the gang life,
yeah.
the which was the Saints, I
I,
believe, right?
yes, the Saints. Yeah, I
To
actually
tell
I
this,
joined I joined the gang before kind of run leaving the house, in a sense that because those were my friends. And you know, back then you fit it, you got in where you fit in. And you, if back then there was no such thing as good kids being bad, it was bad kids being bad. And anything that happened at home made me rebel in school. I wasn't doing good, I was failing in school, all types of things. And then I started to do bad, and then finally I found something that I liked, and what I liked was boxing. So I joined the Chicago Park District, and I trained, and I, you know, uh, uh, I did my jogging daily. I did whatever I had to do. I was actually getting weight on the north side for the Golden Gloves. One night I went out and I jogged, and I came back, and you could tell I was jogging because my sweat clothes were drenched in sweat. And I walked into the store, the small store, which we lived in the same building. And my father saw me, and he said, "Where were you, you punk? You were out there hanging with your gang banging friends." And that was the last time I got involved in boxing. I gave up, and I went full force into just straight gang banging.
mhm.
I didn't, nothing mattered anymore. This guy, that's the last time he does this to me. And it wasn't long after that, I just ran away from home, and I found comfort, love, and acceptance within the guys that I had met, already knew, and I just met many more that I didn't know. And now I was fully involved within the streets of Chicago.
And what was your first, I guess, initiation into that? What was that like?
You know what? I was such an, you know, I had been doing work for what we call the nation, meaning work, meaning I had already been violent. I had been violent. I had been uh, just doing more stuff to opposition than guys who were full fledged members. That when
Mm,
the time came to initiate, there was about 4 or 5 guys being initiated. that one of the older guys, uh, coaches, he pulled me to the side. I was ready to walk the line. What we did, walk a line where two groups stand on each side, and you walk in between, and you got to make it to the end of the line while being punched, kicked, and everything. Hopefully, you don't fall, because if you fall, they're gonna stomp you. I was actually anxious and ready, and he pulled me to the side and he said, "No, you don't even have to walk the line. You're doing more work than some full active members that are saints, you
Mm,
know." So I never had to walk the line, because I was more than willing and more than willing to do work for the nation that guys who were already part of the nation.
mm. So, okay, but why that gang? The Saints. What was it about them as opposed to the other gangs?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, how it is that's the gang of my neighborhood. That's where I
Okay,
live. That's where I live. From
gotcha.
43rd to 47th, from Ashland to Damon is Saints. That's Saintshood. So that's my
Hmm.
neighborhood. I'm loyal to my neighborhood. I'm loyal to my guys. And the difference with me was, even if I had moved out of, like some guys move out of certain neighborhoods and wind up in King's neighborhood or D's neighborhood, and they wind up flipping for that. Not me. I fell in love with the Saints, and that's all it ever was, and that's all it ever will be. Even as I talk as a mentor dealing with gangs right now, I've told some very high up people who are trying to prevent gang violence in Chicago. I said, I was a saint. I'm a saint, and I'm always going to be a saint till the day I die. I don't bang. It's not necessarily a part of to be part of a nation like that is to be bad. Why can't we transform that into something good? Because most of these gangs
Mm.
started out as baseball teams and young
Yep.
kids from the neighborhood who it went from a fist fight and elevated all the way up to what we have now. It was a positive thing once upon a time. So,
Interesting.
yeah,
That's interesting. And the whole discussion around gangs, they're demonized in our culture. Obviously, they've always been demonized, but the hypocrisy behind that is you look at law enforcement and how gang-like they are. You look at corruption in politics, who cause way more damage. They cause suffering and damage by the millions, and yet they get to walk around with the suit and tie and be respected because they're walking around with the suit and tie, and because they have a nice little smile.
yeah,
And that's that's the hypocrisy of the West, is we demonize things like gangs, like, oh, they're all about violence and killing. It's like, well, the politicians created that alternative life through their corruption. That so it's the hypocrisy of the West that I feel like only now we're waking up to.
yeah.
And not that I'm encouraging gang life, but or
No, no, no.
apologizing for it, but I'm just saying that we have to recognize the hypocrisy in Western culture, that we demonize people who become criminals and not demonizing the people who created those conditions that victimize people by the millions. And
Yeah.
so, anyway, it's good.
And
It's
then,
it's
but you
interesting
tell a
point.
kid who punched a kid that you're going to send him to prison for a year as a juvenile because he's a menace to society, because he
Hmm.
punched a kid. I'm a menace to society because I punched a kid. But for instance, let's take George Bush invaded a whole country, 1 million people got unalived, and he's a hero based off of a
Yep.
lie.
Living on
And
a ranch, living on
yeah,
a ranch. You know.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the hypocrisy. But this is all indoctrination. This is
It
all
is.
the elite taking advantage of those who are way below them financially.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Um. So you join the Saints, and life progresses. You find camaraderie, you find a bond, you find a family, as an escape from the abusive household. And then things progress as you get in, as you move forward in your life in Chicago. Violence, drug deals, and you learn a lot. I noticed, I saw the progression of you. See, you're one impression I got from reading your book about you is you are very loyal. Loyalty is a very big part of your code, and you, even in criminal lifestyles, the saying goes, honor amongst thieves, so to speak. It's there. the idea that just because you're a criminal doesn't mean you don't have honor is obviously completely debunked by just reading your book. And I myself, look, I have a relationship with certain gang members here in California,
Hmm.
who belong to Mexican gangs, South Central, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And one thing that, and I met them when on this film project that I was doing, and he's like a brother to me, and I got to know that gang. And a surprising thing about gangs, that I was very inspired by, is the fact that this particular gang that I associate with now and then is that they have a code of protecting kids and protecting women. If you touch a kid, you're done.
Mhm.
And they enforce that.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, they are the law enforcement. And I was looking at that. I'm like, so you're telling me that your gang enforces morality more than law enforcement does.
Exactly.
And it was inspiring to me, and it was actually a positive news, because it's like, okay, so even in a world where there is no law, where laws don't apply, they enforce their own laws that have a lot of morality to it. And that is the misconception of gangs, is that just because it's a gang and it's working outside the legal system doesn't mean it doesn't have morals and ethics. In fact, sometimes those morals and ethics can are far more superior than our law enforcement and the system that we operate in the civilian law abiding world, right?
Mhm.
So anyways, just a side note there. So you progress in the
Just,
gang. Tell
just,
me.
just,
Yeah.
just to piggyback off of what you said. What
Yeah.
do you think destroyed the neighborhoods in Chicago and the gangs? You know, the gangs in Chicago are just about destroyed. The government came in and they cleaned house in the sense that we have law enforcement, but we also have the policing of a neighborhood, what you just talked about. When they imprisoned all the leaders and took all the lions out of the neighborhood, they left nothing but the hyenas to run the neighborhoods. The worst of the
Mm,
worst they left to run the neighborhood, who corrupted these young people. Structure was gone. There was no more structure. It used to be definitely that. I remember,
yeah.
if you read in my book, me and a friend of mine beat the crap out of a dude who was beating his wife down the street from where we were. So we had those things. There was a code of honor. It wasn't perfect, but there was a code of honor. There was certain things. If a certain group of people were misbehaving in the neighborhood, they got dealt with. If they didn't want
Yeah.
to accept being dealt with, they got ran out of the neighborhood. It was whole families ran out of neighborhoods. I remember once upon a time, the whole family, because they were a poison to the neighborhood.
Mm,
And when the feds in the 90s started to clean house, what they called clean house, they actually dirtied everything up. They took those who were respected, who had structure, who had rules and regulations, which was a part of structure, and that was all gone. That's why now, instead of one neighborhood having one gang that goes for 20 blocks south, east, west, south, north, east, west, now those blocks, each block has a gang on it, what they call a clique.
yeah. And
So they destroyed all of that, and now everything is disarray. There's nobody. Even these young guys hate old G's. They you know, how many of the old G's came out of jail and went to their neighborhoods and wound up dead because these young guys didn't want them basically implementing rules and regulations.
yeah. And obviously that's very intentional by law enforcement, because they wanted to create a disarray, and allow these neighborhoods to get fully more
Destroyed.
corrupted.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
want them
Yeah.
destroyed. They want it destroyed, and it has a lot to do with real estate, specifically like for in Chicago, this gentrification. Some of the worst neighborhoods were actually in the best areas, close to the
Hmm.
lakefront, close to downtown. Look at Cabrini Greens,
Hmm.
where you know, the show Good Times in the 70s and all that. Those are all gone now. Those are you couldn't give a building away for free in the Pilsen area, or the low end, which is Bronzeville. Now you can't even touch an empty lot for less than $250,000.
Yeah. Yeah. Gentrification, man. It is it's a beast that is ruining this country and ruining a lot of other countries. It's now it's gentrification is a disease that is spreading to places like Costa Rica, Mexico,
Everywhere.
everywhere. Yeah. Okay, so you joined the Saints. You're now in the gang life. Tell me how things progressed from there and the things that you did, like the the different jobs you would pull off and how what that journey was like for you and where you got your sense of your codes, your personal codes that you live by. What do you ascribe that to? The
Well, I'll tell you what. With me, it had to do with back home.
mm,
I already knew from back home that anybody who turns on his people is a traitor. And
mm,
the worst thing that you could be as a Palestinian is be labeled as a traitor. So I had already been there. If you read in my book, there was a boy who snitched on my brother or said that my brother threw a rock at the Israeli jeeps, and I kicked him in his butt, ripped his pants open, and called him a snitch. So we were taught from an early age for something that pure, fighting for your uh, freedom. I took that and I applied that to this. I took this to be just as equally important as the liberation of Palestine. That if I betray my friends, it would almost like be betraying my people. So it was instilled in me, and that's just the way it went, and that's where it came from.
interesting.
And I loved
And
my
that
guys.
makes
I
sense.
loved my guys a lot, man. I loved my guys a lot. To this day, I think about a lot of them. They were my brothers, man. They were a lot of them are gone, and those were some of the realities, the harsh realities of being a part of that system. Is that this guy that you laughed with, he opened his door to you. His mom and his dad loved you if there was a dad. You slept on their couch. They fed you. Now all of a sudden he's gone and you're never going to see him again. So it becomes enraging, and now you want to avenge your friend, and it becomes a cycle that's nonstop.
I'm so glad you mentioned that this concept of loyalty originated from Al Quds in being Palestinian, because as different as our childhoods are, you and
Yeah.
I learned loyalty from the Palestinians as well,
Mhm.
because at age 18, travel constantly moving in the military lifestyle, I had never had any sense of consistency, I guess. And therefore, like, I would have to leave friends. I would move from one state to another and say goodbye to those friends. And of course, we got distant because of just simple, just life. But when I went to Palestine and got to know my Palestinian friends, I saw the culture, their loyalty that Palestinians expressed to me stuck on me. And
Mhm.
I learned, and I became the man I am today because of the loyalty I learned from Palestinians. And it's so ironic because that's not why I went to Palestine. I went to Palestine to join the IDF. I went to Palestine to assimilate with Israelis, not to assimilate with the Palestinians, but it's just freaking life is crazy like that.
Mhm.
And I wound up falling in love with the Palestinian in their culture while also fighting this, while also fighting it, while fighting like, no, I'm pro-Israeli, dude.
Yeah.
And then it just, so it's that's just a crazy thing that who would think that years later I'd be talking to a guy with a totally different upbringing than I did, but we both share one commonality of learning loyalty from Palestine, and it's just bizarre. And we're both bald, so maybe
Mhm.
that has something to do with it too. So,
No,
go
well,
ahead.
you know what? There's something definitely in people like you. There's something great in you, and I'm gonna tell you. I don't know what type of spiritual person you are, but I am. I believe in God
Yeah,
wholeheartedly. I might not be the best Muslim, but I believe in God, and I believe in, based on my studies, that God has a liking for you or a love for you, man, to guide you from something that evil. Because any one of us could be fall victim to that.
yes,
And many people do. Many people because it's a false sense of pride. Trust
hmm,
me, and they can't see it, but you could see it, and more than me, you could see it. A Palestinian could see it, but how did you see it? And you were going there. So there's something in you, man, that is great. That God some specialty in you, man, for people like you, because it's not supposed to happen like that.
Well, the trip to Jerusalem and living there was a pilgrimage of sorts. I grew up Christian and I'm Christian, and I grew up being told the stories of the Bible and Jerusalem as being the holy city. So obviously, when I went there, I fell in love with it, and I was, you grow up Christian, but they're just stories. They're from some white pastor and talk, with a picture of Jesus with blonde hair, blue eyes, and but so I'm like, I want to know what this story is. I want to touch this thing that I believe in, this thing that I'm being taught since a young age. What is it really? And I wanted to touch and feel it too. And when I'm going to Palestine, it's when I discovered what that thing was. And when you seek something, you find it if you're really truly seeking it. And I found it. I just didn't expect to find it in the way that I found it, and I'm glad I did. So
Hmm.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're n- one. So I'm going to read a passage, a phrase, paragraph. One day in the summer of 1982, as me and my father were standing in front of our store, and so he said to me, "There was some young men your age and older who are volunteering to go to Beirut, Lebanon, to fight alongside their Palestinian brothers against the Israelis. Do you want to go?" I did not hesitate for a second in saying yes. He then said, "Good. Now you have to convince your mother." Tell me, take it from there.
Yeah. At the time, as you've read and you know, I was already I was already in the streets, so I knew death was imminent. I didn't want to be around my father anymore, and I always dreamt of being a fidaiyin, which is what they called the people who were a part of the resistance. In particular, Fidaiyin applied to Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, PLO, Democratic Front, anybody that was resisting the Israelis or the occupation. So I had dreamt of fighting these Israelis, and it didn't matter if I was going to lose my life, because more than likely it would have been the case going to Lebanon at that time. Uh, and but when he said you have to convince your mom, I knew that wasn't going to be an easy sell. I knew it was going to be, and at the time I was only what, I think 14, 15, going on 15, but I wanted to go badly, and I was hoping he would push a little harder, and it meant me getting away from him, period.
Mm.
And that was one of the biggest incentives there was. Um, but it didn't happen. My mother came out the store. He said it in this way. He didn't say, I brought it to your son, but he said, your son wants to go to Lebanon and fight with his people, or something to that effect, with
Yeah.
Fidayeen. And remember my ma's face, even it was evening time, her face turned red. My ma was real white. Her face turned red like a tomato, and she looked at him and she said, you send my son to Lebanon to get killed? When he gets on the plane to go, I'll have the 5 kids on another plane to go back to Jerusalem. He
That
cursed her out and cursed her family out, and and that was the end of that.
yeah. That sounds like a Palestinian mother to me.
Oh yeah,
Big time.
yeah. Well, she was a staunch believer that Yasser Arafat and those guys were all crooks, and that they
Which
weren't really fighting a fight the way it should be fought. And she felt that many Palestinian mothers were losing to their kids, while Yasser Arafat and those close to him were reaping the benefits of whatever was given to them financially. You know?
yeah. That was the sentiment I heard when I was over there as well, that he
Yeah,
was seen as a corrupt crook.
exactly.
So, talking about honor and the code that you lived by, and even and being involved with the gang, you said that one day I saw a guy beating his wife while his two little daughters were screaming and crying on 45th and Hermitage. I was standing with Problem, who was one of your buddies, about 7 houses away from where the guy was beating up his wife. I told Problem I was going down there to beat the fuck out of the guy. Problem looked at me and said, "Don't waste your time, bro. After you help her, she's going to turn on you and stick up for her husband." It really didn't make it a difference to me if she stuck up for her husband after I helped her. I grew up watching my father treating my mother the same exact way, and there's no way that this guy was going to get a beating from me. Wasn't going to get a beating from me for what he was doing to his wife. I ran down there and gave the guy 5 or 6 good blows. He let go of his wife and was covering his head with his arms and cowering without trying to put up a fight. Um, Again, goes to show how you felt about somebody harming another woman, you know? And yeah, so this is always in your DNA. Like you
Yeah,
just, you were, and I had to point that out as a powerful passage.
yeah.
Um, what did you after that incident though? What did that like? Did it give you a sense of greater responsibility after that? After you did that, where you realized that you now also had a responsibility to be a protector, along with all the other things that you were doing?
Yeah, one thing about it is I might have been a bad guy to some people and been involved in gangs, which wasn't a great thing. But I found love and I found family in that. But there were certain things just because I was a bad guy and I was a thug and I was whatever I was doing. There were certain lines I wouldn't cross. There were certain things
Yeah.
I wouldn't do. The difference between then and now is I was kind of embarrassed if I was to be a bully to a people who had nothing to do with nothing. I made it my business never to try to oppress someone because they knew, and a lot of people knew uh, my reputation in the neighborhood at the time, and I was a goofy kid. I was nuts. I didn't care about nothing. I didn't care what did death mean to me. It didn't mean anything. Uh,
Mm.
so it wasn't a thing that was on my mind, not one bit. So people feared me in that neighborhood, even at the young age of 15 and 16. And I really had no idea until much later in life how people looked at me. But based on my behavior, based on the way I carried myself, some people were in fear of me. But I never just walked around and there was people who weren't involved in gangs and I would oppress them in the neighborhood. My fight was select group of people who I was fighting with. We understood what we had going on and we dealt with each other whatever way we needed to deal with each other, whether to take them out or they take me out or they take us out or we take them out. But anything outside of that had nothing to do with that. And
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. I do. I do.
So that woman being beaten, it wouldn't have been. Somebody would have the idea like, ha, 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 look at that guy beat his wife. Oh, I'm a thug. I'm a gang member. I should like that. No, there were certain things we just didn't accept and we didn't go for. Child molestation being one,
Hmm.
raping another, uh, assaulting and robbing old people another, damaging certain things another. You beating up your wife in the street or beating up your kids wasn't going to happen. There are certain things that we just didn't indulge in and we didn't approve of, and
Yeah.
you see the result of that one.
It's a form of enforcement that
Yes.
keeps morality on the street, even in the absence of law. And
Exactly.
that's yeah.
And,
Um,
and and even the law, like I had a friend who was killed. He wasn't a saint, but the gang in the next neighborhood came into my neighborhood and pulled a hit and killed a kid who wasn't one of my guys. He was a kid from the neighborhood. We all knew him, but he wasn't a saint. And these guys were our opposition, and they came and they killed him. And I remember the police, gang crime. They go out to say, "Hey, what happened to what's his name yesterday? What happened to him?
mhm.
You ain't gonna go avenge him? You know the cops. This is the cops geeking this up. Avenge what? The way we look at it is another cool fool bites the dust.
Yeah.
No, that's the way you look at it. But they're trying to entice the guys to go do
Mm.
something to the next. Like I'm going to tell you, I'm going to go do something. We're going to do something. We're not going to tell you nothing, anyways. But to
Yeah.
show you that how they want the cycle to continue. They're
Yep.
geeking you up to go do something
Yeah.
because your guy, you know,
They get off on it because it's like in their minds it's like, hey, I'm
it's
on the right side of the law, you're on the wrong side, so whatever
exactly,
happens,
and it's job security, you know, and the way they look at it is they're a bunch of whatever they think of us. Let them kill each other.
yeah, they see it as a zoo. They
Yeah, we
see the
knock two
streets as
birds
a
with
zoo.
one stone. He kills him, he goes in the ground, and we catch him, and he goes to jail for the rest of his life.
Yep,
Two birds with one stone, you know?
exactly. Speaking of interaction with police officers, you had an interaction where with a detective, uh, and it's very ominous. Detective said, "Where are you from?" You said, "Jerusalem. I'm Palestinian." Detective said, "Holy shit! Let me ask you something. How does it feel to be a bastard without a country?" When I heard him say that, everything around me turned red. I started yelling profanities at him. He got up and grabbed me by the shirt, started punching me in the face multiple times, but I felt nothing, and I was still yelling at him. I was saying, "You hit like a little girl, motherfucker. Little boys in my neighborhood punch harder than you." He really got angry, and he put me in a headlock and proceeded to punch me in the rib cage. But I kept repeating the same thing, and he was even laughing, and I was even laughing at him now. He stopped and let go of me. Then he backed up a couple feet and was looking down at me like a wounded dog because his pride was hurt. Then he sat down and said, "Your mother has VD." And without, so what, that, if there's not a better metaphor for the way that the Palestinians have been treated by Israel and the greater West, I would say, is that interaction. Is this kind of like, well, Israel abused the Palestinians, and now we get to make fun of them for it and get to gloat over them. You know,
Exactly. Exactly.
very powerful point.
And it's these things, like this particular thing. People think that this is a word and some words were exchanged, not realizing that those his tongue was like a knife and it cut deep to
Hmm.
where he's beaten up a 16-year-old kid who's small to begin with,
Yeah,
and it still was not phasing him. It shows you how hard his words cut, that it didn't even matter what else he was doing after that.
yeah. So we're gonna move forward regarding heroin deals. Ricky, who is Ricky? Ricky and his people had a hell of an operation. As for people who think the Mexicans from the motherland are stupid, are themselves stupid, ignorant, and know nothing about these people. Most of them are law-abiding people, and I myself have nothing but respect and admiration for Mexican nationalists because they are kind-hearted and hardworking people. The fact is that this great nation would be in big trouble without them, if that's not the goddamn truth. Yeah, explain just a Palestinian in the United States forming a relationship with Mexicans. Um, Tell me what that dynamic is like. It's a very interesting one.
Um,
And
I'll tell you what. I look at the Mexican people in general as my people. I've been
mhm,
around them a lot longer than I've been around my people. They've
mhm,
showed me nothing but love and respect. They're caring people. They're loving people. I mean, of course, not all, but a whole lot of them. Uh, they're very loyal, very accepting. I mean, I've felt so much love, man, just entering the yard, entering around them. They never made me feel like I was from somewhere else. And and a lot of times, man, I just sit and I think, and I try not to form new friendships, so to speak, because I've tried and I'm never able to find that friendship that I had and that love that I had during those times with those
yeah.
particular people. But they're very, very, very smart people. I mean, they're simple
Oh
people.
yeah.
They're simple people, and but they can work miracles, man. They can work miracles. They're survivalists. You know, I had a situation where I was in when I was in federal prison. A friend of mine was a Detroit outlaw from the Outlaw Motorcycle Club,
Hmm.
and he used to eat fruits all the time. And one day a conversation came out, and he's talking about deporting people. And I said to him, I said, hey, I said his name, and I said, you're always eating apples and stuff. I said, you love fruits, right? And he says, yeah, of course. I said, good. I said, when you say deport these people and send them back to where they came from, I hope you're able to pay $20 for an apple. Well, what are you talking about? I said, because your people, not nobody in this country is going to go in them strawberry fields in the hot sun and pick
Yeah.
strawberries for $20 a day, 10 and 11 and 9 and 8 hours a day in the hot sun, and live in shacks on the farm during the season of picking. So a apple is going to be about $20 for you to spend on just to pay for one apple if an American has to pick it. And that's the reality, man. And without these people, this country will
Mhm.
shut down. And we try to fool ourselves. We listen to people say the dumbest stuff. We need to get rid of the immigrant and this and that. I know some people that come to this country and they're here 2, 3 years and they open a business. Yet the typical European American works for a factory his whole life, never thinks about opening up a business. Yet
That
small businesses generate most of the tax for this country.
that is a great point and something that I bring up in this whole conversation, this xenophobic conversation concerning Mexican immigrants, especially concerning illegal Mexican immigrants. We've all seen the meme that this is the elites want the peasants to look down upon other peasants so that we don't turn on them. And so we want to, the demonization of Mexican immigrants is so that we do not look at the elites as the source of us getting completely screwed over in this country. And it's infuriating because just like you said, there's Americans, I would say, starting in, like, I don't know, maybe like the 1950s, started to get this mentality that the the thing that you should strive for is getting a job at a big corporation and getting promoted. And that's what you should ascribe to, not starting a small business. Why? Because a small business is for peasants. It's for the lower class. It's for the working class. What you want a job that you can put on a suit and tie and get promoted up the chain. Well, that mentality screwed us over because now we're a corporate country where everybody has been um, idolizing the idea of getting promoted in a large corporation. And meanwhile, these large corporations are screwing us over. Whereas Mexicans who come over here, they have a very old school mentality of starting a small business, and small businesses is what creates that robustness in an economy, not corporate takeovers. And so when we demonize Mexican immigrants, we're demonizing the very roots of what our economy used to look like before big corporations took over. And what's interesting about Mexican immigrants, with all the Fox News Trumpism going on, is that they say, oh, they're coming up here to spread crime. Well, interestingly and ironically, illegal immigrants, when they move into a neighborhood, guess what happens to the crime? It goes down.
Down.
So that's the effect that illegal immigrants have on our neighborhoods, is that they bring crime down. Why? Because they keep to themselves. They don't want to screw anything up because they don't want to get deported, and they're not there to cause crime. They're there to
Make a
make a
living.
living and survive and provide for their families and just start a new life. Why would you cross a border and risk all that just to come to a country to start crime? It makes no
Yeah.
sense. It's nonsensical. But again, this is the propaganda that's being fed from the very top elites down on to the working class to get us to demonize them instead of demonizing the people up top. And goddamn, it's infuriating.
And it's a way to actually deflect for politicians. It's a way to deflect
Oh yeah.
of put the blame on these people and keep your eye off of us of what we're doing. We're sending billions to Israel. We're sending billions to Ukraine. We're working 6 months a year to receive $175,000, $173,000 a year. They only work 6 months if you add all their recesses.
Yeah.
Which one of us works 6 months and makes $173,000 a year? That's not to mention all the French benefits, right? So
Not to mention the fact that somehow magically they have millions of dollars in their bank accounts.
exactly.
Where did that money come from? Pretty
Yeah,
sure.
Nancy Pelosi didn't come into that office with $50 million in her bank account. That
and
she
they
had $50 million in her bank account about 20 years ago. How'd she get all that money? Yeah, so
and they call Mexicans the freeloaders, dude. Like
exactly,
it's like
exactly.
seriously
Biggest welfare,
freeloading.
the biggest welfare recipients, aside from Israel, within country are the politicians. Look at this country. You go to the Secretary of State, they treat you like shit, and it is us who pay them. You go to City Hall, they treat you like shit. They treat you like you're an outsider, like you're somewhere, somehow, somewhere there as a welfare recipient, when in reality it is the American worker that puts these people in place to work. And they have no respect for the American people. The
Mhm,
American people have lost all dignity, all
mhm,
respect for themselves. They get none, you
mhm.
know. And I go to Secretary of State and I hear stuff. I walk to Secretary of State, the lady comes out, European American lady, talking to people like trash. And I said, ma'am, this is during as COVID was fading and long line, it's cold outside. And I said, ma'am, she looked, turned around, looked at, I said, why do you come out here and talk to people like that? If you don't like your job, I'll take your job. I know what you get paid. I'll take your job. You don't talk like that to people. When I got up to the front, it was an African American older guy who was a part of it, kind of guiding people in. And I was saying something. He said, "Oh, you must be the guy that was giving my supervisor a hard time." I said, how did I give her a hard?" So I talked to him a little bit. And the people with me, they're happy that I'm talking like this, but they won't even stand up for themselves. And I told the guy, I said, "You work for us.
Yep.
We're the
Yep.
taxpayers. We're the boss." See, the reality, the people in the United States of America have lost a grip on reality. The reality is that you are the power base, not the government. You are what runs this country, not the government. The government works for you. You don't work for the government. But they've done so much dividing among the races that everybody hates everybody. And the best thing for the government is that divided people, the government will stand and the people will fall. United the people will stand, and the government, if it's corrupt, will fall. And we don't get it. We just don't get it.
And I often wonder, yeah, here I rack my brain for why that is, why we have this mentality, and I think a lot of it to do. I made a video about this, especially, is that because we look at government like they're our mommy and our daddy. We need a
Exactly.
mommy and daddy. We need a little mommy and daddy to run us, to run our lives, because we're not confident in ourselves. Because like take Mexican immigrants for example, they come to across that border to come and work hard for their families. They're not looking for a daddy. They're not looking for a mommy to take care of them. They're looking to start their own life and make something of it with their bare hands. We as Americans, we're like, we look at the government like it's mommy and daddy. We're like, when is mommy and daddy going to take care of us? When are we going to? And I think that's what it is. I think that's one of the psychological reasons behind that. What you're talking about, it's this
Yeah.
need, it's this worship of leadership, this worship of government. That government is all wise and all
Yeah.
knowing, and it has our best interest in
Yeah.
mind.
Yes.
So
And not just that, not just that. We've given them the feeling because we've gone to them so much. We have a problem. We need you to fix it. And we've played that card so much that now they feel like they're gods and they're going to
yep,
do everything they want for
yep,
us. So all the laws they pass pertaining to school do nothing but harm our kids, harm our schools. But we've done this. We've done this because we've come to condition ourselves, or they've helped us condition ourselves to believe that we don't know what's good for us, that they know what's good for us, and that they will do things that are good for us, which we may not feel are good for us, but we don't know any better because they're much smarter than us, and we're
yeah,
not that smart.
yeah, yeah. It's yeah, exactly. I mean, Uh, and you're talking about division. You were talking about them dividing us.
Yeah.
One thing, an interesting thing that they've done is dividing the right and the left. And what's both sides, in my opinion, as far as the working class, is they both offer some valuable philosophies in a certain way. For example, the left emphasizes class consciousness, that we need to start uniting against the ruling class. The right wing has been emphasizing small government. Now, by dividing the right and the left, what you do is you get the left to demonize the right wing, and I mean the working class, not like the
Mhm.
right wing politicians. The left, we all know, like the rednecks in the deep south are like, we need small government. Government's too big. They got a point. Now, there's a lot of other problems in the right wing working class, obviously, like racism and xenophobia and all that stuff. But one thing that they are right about is, yeah, we need small government. But the left wing has been taught by the government to demonize that side and be like, nah, anybody talking about small government, they're a right wing fanatic racist. And then the right wing has been brainwashed by the government to feel like the left wing is all communists who want to take over your freedoms in your life and stuff. When the left wing just wants the working class to be empowered. So by dividing those two, you're also dividing two philosophies. And until those two philosophies join with each other and getting rid of all the bad shit that comes with those two sides, like the racism on the right, the
Mm,
xenophobia on the right,
mm, mm.
and the I guess the uh, what do you call it? The putting on a pedestal government and the role of the state in helping our lives get better. If we can get rid of those bad parts of the right and the left and unite the two, it's game over for the ruling class.
Yeah,
Game
and
fucking over, man.
that's what they're actually supposed to be doing by
Mm-hmm.
themselves. But there is no benefit in them. There's no benefit for them if they were to do that. In reality, if you look at the so-called conservatives in this country or the Republican Party, they don't behave like Republicans. They don't fall under the ideology of whatever Republican ideology is. You look at the Democrats. The Democrats, you think these liberals or these moderate Democrats, you think they're actually acting like moderate Democrats? Neither one of them is behaving like their ideology actually says they should. They're
Yeah,
one party. They're one party.
uniparty,
Elitists
the
who
purple party.
have nothing to do with two parties. It's one party
Absolutely.
pretending to be two parties in order to flamboozle the masses to say you do have a choice. There is no choice. Look at them. Look at them right now with the subject of Israel, with the subject of Zionism, the genocide that's going on in Palestine. Does it
Uh,
look like they're two different parties? They're the same thing. They're we are standing with Israel. Israel has a right to defend itself, and all that same language across the board.
yep. Exactly.
They're
It's
more. We had a so-called debate for the presidency. The whole debate was about who was more subservient to Israel than the other.
oh, I know. I know. It was a
So
big
that
who
should
could
show
suck up
you:
to
is America first? America first.
that. By the way, that debate, a lot of people were asking, well, who won the debate? Was it Trump or Biden? You know what? They both lost.
They
Not to
both
each
lost.
other.
They
They
both were
both lost to
ridiculous.
themselves.
Yes.
Trump really exposed himself to his base when he
Yeah.
was sucking up to Israel, and Biden, of course, was falling apart. They both lost that debate. It
Oh, they
wasn't.
both.
It wasn't who won over it. It
Yeah.
was. It was like they both beat. They defeated themselves, and I hope.
That wasn't a presidency debate. That was a race, a race from start to finish about who can suck up to Israel and defend Israel more than the other. It had nothing to do with a presidential race for the United States of America.
Yeah, yeah, that most definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so gang life, you get involved. A lot of drama happens within that gang life. Too much to cover in any small amount of time. But to skip forward, you get caught up, and your trial was a sham. It was a
You
complete
mean on the drug?
farce.
You mean on the drug case?
I believe so. With
Yeah.
the deaf juror, there was a juror
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
deaf,
yeah, yeah. After
and
that's after my prison time and coming out, and then getting involved in the drug game after kind of staying away from it, but wound up getting sucked into it. I was arrested by the FBI and the DEA for a conspiracy, a cocaine conspiracy. That's what you're
and
talking about. My federal
right.
trial. Yeah.
And tell me how that played out with the deaf juror, just to give the audience a little
Yeah.
a little
So I went.
taste of what.
Of course, they want me to become a government informant. That wasn't going to happen. And boy, they
Yeah,
couldn't take it. They couldn't take it. We flip everybody. You want to come in here? We flip most people. And the crazy part about it is, I had three prosecutors. They were all Zionist Jews: Fleshner, Shaver, and Rubenstein. My
mm,
judge was a well-known Zionist Jew. Marvin E. Aspin. Anyway, so I go to trial with no tapes, no drugs, no DEA sixes, which is investigatory reports, one
Mm,
witness who's caught lying on the stand about his whole testimony, never saw me, never talked to me. He had been in the custody of Cook County sheriffs, and he's testifying to having conversation with me, so we proved that. Uh, then I get found guilty. So my lawyers, who actually represented R. Kelly later in life, and the ex-governor Balogovich, and many other big names, uh, asked for the jury to be polled. First polling, the idea is that I asked the jury, not me, meaning the clerk, is this your verdict then and now guilty? The only answer you're supposed to give is yes or no.
mm,
Nothing else. That's the instructions. So they call the first name, nobody answers. Call it again, nobody answers. I'm looking at the jury, I'm getting ready to start counting. I'm thinking maybe they left one in the jury room or something. And as soon as I look at the jury to count, the first old man, the second row, first one, the lady sitting next to him, she's young, probably about 30 something years old, hits him with the elbow. He looks over at her and nothing. He turns his head. They ask again. She hits him again. He looks at her and she says, they're asking you for your verdict. I don't understand. I don't know. I don't know. They bring him out of the jury box in front of the bar, which is right in front of the judge. The judge instructs him again. She's going to ask you your verdict. Either answer yes or no. She asks him again. He's, huh? What? I can't understand. I can't hear you. She's looking at the judge and he says, ask again. The judge, she asked again and he said, oh, my verdict is here. Not guilty, not guilty. The whole courtroom kind of erupts. He says, oh, I mean guilty. I'm sorry, I can't hear. And they find me guilty and send me to jail for 13 freaking years with this guy.
mm.
Finds me guilty, couldn't hear nothing, don't even know what the case is about.
And I'm glad you said that because that just shows that no matter how much we like to put our criminal justice system on this pedestal after
Sons of
Hollywood
bitches.
movies and what do you call it? Law and Order episodes, it's a
It's all
shame.
nonsense. I'm
It's
telling you,
all
it's all nonsense.
nonsense.
The thing that kills me most when sometimes, and I don't like watching cop shows. I don't like watching them.
Yeah, because they're
But
bullshit.
I don't watch them. But I've seen at the end of every show, most of these suspects will be released on technicalities, and I'm like, what? My whole life dealing with the criminal justice system, I haven't seen many, if any, get released on technicalities. There is no such thing as technicalities. If you have where they violate your constitutional rights, they come up with an amendment to say that it's okay to violate it. Or a Fourth Amendment right violation, there is no search and seizure. That's okay because now we made a thing called exigent circumstances. So which means we can knock your door down, come in without a search warrant based on exigent circumstances. Or you didn't have a gun? Oh, that's okay. We'll come up with a thing called constructive possession. Constructive possession means that you never have to have possessed the gun, but you still can be found of constructive possession. You could have possessed the gun.
Mm. The beautiful criminal injustice system that we got.
Yeah,
So you were in prison. A lot of stuff happens there. It's you learn about the code of honor in prisons and then the lack of code of honor in prison system, and it has its own ecosystem. Prisons have its own life, its own drama,
mm,
and there's a lot in there about that. But we got to skip forward to when you found Islam,
yeah,
when you were united with Islam. I'll read a passage. The time came when something inside me said, "It is time for you to start going to Friday Muslim prayer." Plus, the statement of the older African American Muslim had a strong effect on me that it was pushing to want to find out what Islam was about. I wanted to know what drove these African Americans to love the religion I was born into. I myself knew nothing about. I thought it was an Arab thing, and I had no clue that Arabs were the minority in Islam. I had no clue that there were millions of Eastern European Muslims, or that Indonesia had the largest Muslim population of the world. To be fully honest, I also wanted to go out of my pride being hurt by what the older African American Muslims said. Give more context to that.
Well, here I was in Oxford, Wisconsin, in a federal prison, and I had a problem with a Latin king. And we come out to the common area, which is the hallways, because they're getting ready to call lunch, and then you go to the yard. It was dinner time actually, to go to the rec yard or whatever you want to do at that particular time. And there's a crowd of people standing there, and I'm standing here, and there's an African American, about two people into the crowd, and another African American. This guy was from the nation. The guy he was talking to, the older guy, was a Sunni Muslim, but the other guy was from the nation. So he says to the older gentleman, whose back was to me, and even the nation guy couldn't see me, because it's a whole crowd of people waiting to go out. There's people talking, and I hear them talking. The young African American tells the older African American, who's a Sunni, "Hey, did you hear about the young Arab brother? He had that problem with that uh, Spanish guy. He didn't know he was a Latin king, but I know." And then the older African American brother said to him, "You know, as long as he stays away from Allah and this religion, he's always going to have problems." And
Mm,
that made me feel about that big.
mm,
A guy talking from the United States of America, a descendant of slaves who has found Islam, is saying something about me where I should be the shining light for others. Instead, I'm just a darkened individual who can't even represent his religion because I don't know my religion. And this brother who has suffered loves my religion more than me, knows my religion more than me, and says, because I lack in my religion, I'm always going to have those problems.
and your community, um, with with black people in prison, it what was that like? What were those dynamics like? I've in watching and studying Malcolm X's journey to Islam. It's very inspiring. Um, and Black liberation in the United States and its connection with Islam in a big way.
Yeah.
How did that affect you? You know,
Um, well, I'll tell you what. I mean, within my community, when you say my community, do you mean Arabs, Palestinians, or just Muslims in general?
Muslims. But I mean,
Well,
I'm
the
talking
first, yeah,
specifically, I
the
guess, the
first,
dynamics between. Yeah.
the first few years of my imprisonment, I didn't have any dealing with the Muslims, not at
Mm,
all. I was doing my own thing. I was a loner. I dealt with a few people. It wasn't like state prison. State prison was different. This was federal prison. Most of the people, in my eyes, were informants. I knew they were informants, and so I wanted to stay away from everybody. But once I got involved with the Muslim community, I uh, I, um, I developed a strong sense of love for the community and a strong sense of respect for them. These are young, or not young even, but came to prison when they were young, and now they were much older. And there's the young ones, and these people didn't know anything about Islam, but they've learned so much about Islam. Some of them even spoke Arabic, and
mhm,
their tongue is English. They're American. They come from the south side of Chicago and east side of Detroit and Philly and New York and Cali, and the ex gang members are still gang members, but now they've learned Islam, and they have a sense of pride, and they have a sense of dignity, Islamic dignity, and they're proud of what they have, and they love it, and their whole life revolves around it. I mean, day and night, and it was
mhm,
impressive, man. It was very impressive, and I fell in love with them because I felt nothing but love from them, and I knew the suffering they had been through. And I've read Malcolm X's book. First book I ever read in my life was Malcolm X's autobiography. I developed a strong sense of love and respect for him and others. I didn't know most of this stuff. So
Yeah,
I found a strong attachment to them, and I felt that they were my brothers. And from there on, I was attached to them, and they were attached to me.
that's beautiful. I love that. That's one of my favorite parts of the book. Moving on with Islam, uh, pe- uh, people were always intrigued and interested in trying to find out about Islam, but they almost all had great misconceptions about the religion because of all the propaganda that had been spread through the mainstream media, Hollywood politicians, and some religious media leaders. Some religious leaders. Um, yeah, it's permeated our culture, and I feel like all that's crashing down.
It
You
is
know, with the
fine.
decentralization of media power into like the podcasting sphere, for example, the YouTube sphere, um, it's all falling apart. All that propaganda is crumbling to the ground, and that's what's so beautiful about this time period. With all the bad shit we're seeing,
Exactly.
the decentralization of media is a gift from Allah Himself. It is
Yes,
God. It is Allah. It
absolutely.
is Allah breaking down the walls of constriction and imprisonment and allowing us to receive truth from all kinds of different directions. And we're seeing what that truth is doing to us as human beings. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. With all the bad news we're getting, that is one beautiful thing that's coming out of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so I'll read.
there's a in Islam, Allah says they plan, you plan. Um, says we plan, they plan, I plan, but Allah is the best of planners. And
Mhm,
just think, 70 something years of propaganda, carte blanche to be able to tell what they want, and it all unraveled.
mhm,
Social media is scrappy, is what some people may think it is. Because see, social media, you can come on social media for whatever you want and find it. You
mhm.
come and you become a bigger piece of crap than you ever were. You come on here and you could learn religion. You could learn to be a crook. You could learn to be a con man. You could learn religion. You could learn business. You could learn uh, uh, geography, history, whatever you want. But social media, for the most part, has given us an out, has given us a say, especially for the Palestinian people, but not just Palestinian people, but many people, because we were not allowed to have a say. We were not allowed to speak. We were only like a group of people or a person who was sat in the middle of the rainforest and yelled at the top of his lungs. Nobody heard you. There was no way, nobody in sight. You couldn't make any impression upon anyone, but now we do. So everything they've done has unraveled, like you said, in a short period of time. And there's no stopping it. And
There's
that's the
no.
plan of God, where the God says, I am the best of planners.
When truth and lies are competing with each other, the truth always wins. It's only
Always.
when you're able to imprison the truth and keep and only allow the lies, that's when obviously lies can permeate and win, because that's the only option available. But if you give truth a fair fight, even with, like you said, with social media, you can learn a lot of bullshit and come out of there a more ignorant person with even more hatred in your heart,
Mm,
or you can come out of there more enlightened. But when truth and
absolutely.
lies are competing with each other in the soup of
Eventually.
social media, what the effect that I believe it has when the lies are mixed in is that it's also training us to learn discernment. We're
Yes, it
learning to discern. I mean, we are evolving so fast right now,
is. Mm,
especially since October 7th, to learn about, what's a psyop, what's not a psyop, what is
exactly.
truth, what is derailment, and we're learning to discern at the speed of light right now. It's
Exactly.
insane.
Yeah, I mean, look
Um,
how many people had no idea that Zionism even existed. What is Zionism? It's like something foreign that you never. Now people are saying, I had no idea what Zionism was.
yeah,
I mean, there's we're all learning stuff. There is not one of us that got on here with social media after October 7th, before October 7th, whether TikTok, Facebook, that has not learned from somebody. We all have taught each other something. You have taught
absolutely.
me something. I have taught you something. Joe has taught us something. Janet has taught us something. We all are learning. Some of the things we come to learn by accident. We even have figured things out accidentally.
Hmm. Oh yeah, most definitely. I've
I'm
learned so
telling you.
much accidentally. And what's also beautiful, about this time period that I talk about a lot that I don't feel like we're appreciating enough is that this surgical separation between Zionism and Jews is
Yeah,
so beautiful. And guess who's leading the way on that? It's Palestinians.
yeah,
Palestinians are saving the name of Judaism.
exactly.
They are taking a scalpel. It's like Palestinians pull out a scalpel and they're
Mhm.
surgically cutting off this cancer called Zionism and
Exactly.
separating the two and saying, "Hey, look, these are Jews. These are Zionists.
Mhm.
They're not the same. Here's
Exactly.
Jews, here's Zionists.
This is
Learn the
Judaism.
fucking
Yeah.
difference."
Big difference between Judaism and Zionism.
And Palestinians are leading the way on that. That's what's
Mhm.
so ironic about all this because we're trained to think that, oh, Palestinians and Jews hate each other. No,
Exactly.
Palestinians are saying, stop mixing this
Exactly.
with this and
Yeah.
separate the goddamn two to the
Yeah. Stop,
point
stop
where
hijacking Judaism.
the elites got so worried about it, so desperate, that they even passed a resolution in Congress to keep the two connected. And it's such a desperate bitch move that they did by doing that because
Mm.
everybody's like, wait a minute, you're actually passing a revolution to keep two definitions in the same, but like, oh, now we know you're full of
Yeah.
shit because you got that desperate. So
Yeah. And
want to talk about
you are part of the problem, not part of the solution, and you intend on keeping this problem and this cancer alive.
absolutely. We're going to move on to Ramadan. The month of Ramadan is when Muslims fast from sunrise to sundown, and that became my favorite time of year. The administration accommodated and respected every faith and allowed us all to practice and fulfill their religious duties as much as they could. And they never felt short in their duty. This is what makes the United States of America such a great nation. And a person should feel blessed to live in this great nation. Sure, it's not perfect, but nothing in this world is. Do I agree with much of its foreign policies? Of course not, especially the ones pertaining to the Middle East, Palestine, and Israel in particular. A Muslim is treated better in American prison when it comes to his religion than he would be as a free man in some of these so-called Muslim countries where tyrants and corrupt officials rule the country. That was a powerful statement, and in many ways, because Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims in general are demonized as being hating American, death to America. I
Mhm.
have never met a Muslim, Arab, or Palestinian in this country who hates America as a whole. They hate the government. So do we all. They hate our foreign policies. So do we all. There's
Exactly.
nothing different about the frustration that Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians have for America than any of us have,
Yeah.
but they've been demonized. So that was a very patriotic statement, and we need
Yeah.
to separate the two between nationalism, which is worshiping your country as an idol and saying that everything about it is pure and good and everybody else fuck everybody else in the rest of the world, and then patriotism, which is a genuine love for your country, the land and the people within it, and wanting what's best for that, and that's why I think that statement is very powerful, and I'm sure you've gotten a lot of flack for that sentiment, but
You know what? I haven't, I've never heard
that's good.
one. But you know why? Because if somebody was to come to me, they better come correct and they better have a decent argument for me. And usually it fails. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, it fails. You can't tell me. I know the situation. I'm telling you from me, and you know this is the truth. Um, but the only thing we hate is American foreign policy. Now that we've assimilated, we also hate that you give our tax dollars away. We also hate that you don't give us free health care because we live in this nation. So whatever hurts any other American actually hurts us.
Yes.
So you have to be patriotic. That's what people don't understand. Just because I disagree with you on something, it doesn't mean I hate you. Oh, they hate our freedoms. They hate your freedom so much that they run to this country to want to live in this country. Does that make sense to you? I mean, you
The,
gotta
you,
sometimes use
you know who hates our freedoms? You know who hates our freedoms?
Mm.
The government hates our
Of
freedoms.
course.
They
That's
hate our
why they
freedoms.
pass. That's why they pass laws and bills to take away our freedoms. One of the founding fathers said, and I had to tell this to a lot of Americans. He said, um, uh, a person who's willing to give up his freedom in the name of security deserves neither.
Yeah. And speaking of that, the founding fathers, little fact that people don't know about the Constitution, which I consider myself a constitutionalist in many ways. and not because it was written by a bunch of old white dudes a long time ago. I love the Constitution because it is thousands of years old. When the
Yeah,
Iroquois nations, and the Iroquois nation is they're the ones that inspired the Constitution and the Quran. The Quran and the Iroquois nations inspired the Constitution. A lot of people don't know that some of the founding fathers read the Quran and they were inspired by the merits within it. And it's so to hate Islam is to also hate one of the roots of the Constitution of the United States. So,
exactly.
and, um, we're on the last page that I marked. Um, we're talking about 9/11. Every time I heard Osama bin Laden open his mouth, I wanted to reach through the radio and snatch his tongue out of his mouth so that he wouldn't talk anymore because he had no business speaking on behalf of all Muslims. He had he and people like him were hijacking the religion of Islam and their crazy ideologies. They made threats against strong nations that cannot harm, and in return, those nations struck back at weak Muslim nations, and the people paying a heavy price were the poor Muslims who were already oppressed. And also, along those lines, we're learning about ISIS, about how ISIS was most likely created by the United States, CIA, and Israel. They're not Islam. They were meant to
Just
create further turmoil within the Muslim countries and to
just
further keep Islam in this stigma of being these cartoonish versions that the West portrays about Muslims. You know,
just think about this. Arab Spring 2011. The Syrian people rise against a tyrannical family that has run the country for 40 years, that has oppressed them. There was a saying that when you saw 10 Syrian men walking down the street, 8 of them were government informants. People were taken, never to be seen again, from Lebanon, from Syria, ran by a family belonging to a small sect called Alawites, uh, that's derived from the Shia sect. The people rise and say, enough. 82% of Syria is Sunni Muslims. They're asking for their freedom. The Egyptians had received their freedom for a short period, so maybe we could. In 1987, Assad butchered a whole city of Sunni Muslims called Hama, a city that has been around since the time of Jesus. He murdered, butchered 30,000 Syrian citizens from air, land, and whatever other way he could. 30,000, wiped that city off the face of the earth. And when the people rose and the military started to defect and the Sunnis were winning, they had gained 85% of the nation. It scared not only the Syrian government, not only Israel, but the Jordanian government, the Saudi government, because they knew if Assad was toppled, Israel was done. They knew if Assad was toppled, that group was going to Jordan to liberate Jordan from that tyrannical family, and they were going to Saudi Arabia to liberate Saudi Arabia and name it to its original name called Hijaz. So how do you
yeah.
defeat it? How do you defeat it and turn the world against this rebel movement that arose in Syria called the Free Syrian Army, which had some elements of Jabhat al-Nusra, which was a radical Islamic movement, but nothing like ISIS. So they developed ISIS, and ISIS started fighting. The ISIS never fought Assad. ISIS only fought the Free Syrian Army and Jabhat al-Nusra. And then they turned the whole world against the Free Syrian Army, not fighting ISIS, but fighting and demolishing and destroying the Free Syrian Army that had won so much against Assad and was about to topple Assad. The only thing that was left was Damascus and the southern part bordering Israel. Uh, so this is ISIS, and this is what ISIS has done.
Isn't it interesting that we have not heard a word from Assad concerning the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza. It's
And
just
you
kind of
never will.
funny. You
And you
never
never
will.
will. Look, his father. His father. What did his father do to the Palestinians in Lebanon? Tel
Mm,
Zatar. Go read about Tel Zatar. He butchered the Palestinians in Tel Zatar and other places. Who
mm,
did Assad stand with when it came? He stood with when there was a problem with the Lebanese Christians. Not all the Lebanese Christians, but the phalangists, what called the Kataib. Assad stood on their side along with Israel against the Palestinians. And
mm.
Palestinian people don't know that. These young people who stand up here and fight for Assad and talk about Assad is such a great guy, they don't know these things.
Well, that's why it's good that people like you who are very astute with this teach this young generation. Like people like you are going to give this revolutionary generation strength and knowledge and guidance, and that's what's so important about you taking the time and taking the ambition to write this book. And by the way, you told me, I believe, when you were talking about the book, that you did not use proper grammar in its the syntax. You didn't use proper syntax,
Mm,
and it's true, you did it. And guess what? I respect your book even more because of that,
yeah,
because we have too many people trying to be so refined and
no,
trying to be so, I don't know, just curated.
yeah,
And I respect somebody who said, I'm going to write it, and I'm going to write it as me, and I'm going to get it out there regardless of whether it's perfect or not, because I want it to be out there. And when I read your book, yeah, I noticed all the grammatical mistakes, and it added to my respect of you, because it means that you didn't care what people thought about that.
exactly.
You just wanted to tell your story, and that's what I respected about your book even more, because I can go get a book that's perfectly written and it might be full of a lot of bullshit. It could be nicely refined, curated bullshit. This book had so much truth that wasn't perfectly curated, and it adds to my respect.
And and
And
and, and and I wanted, I was for a minute. Remember, it wasn't high times like right now for Palestinians.
mhm,
I didn't want somebody to tell me what I got to do about editing. I had a friend who was going to edit it, and I said, you know what? I don't want to edit it. I want to keep it the
don't
way it is.
it.
I don't want to edit it because I want it to be from a kid who failed grammar school, never went to high
Yep,
school, received his GED in federal prison, and
yep.
all odds were against him. And people said all these things about him, and I'm gonna pull it off myself, and I'm not even gonna use a publishing company.
That's
So
why, yeah, that's why I respected it so much, because you made that move. It's a boss move to make.
yeah. So then you look at all the reviews on it, people who've wrote it, and it's amazing. I don't know if you looked at the reviews.
I
I
did.
mean, there's a
Yeah,
guy.
I left one. I left the
Yeah,
big one.
yeah, you did. You left a great one, actually. There's a guy from Canada who says this is the best book that he's read since he's read the autobiography of Malcolm X. For a guy like me to use my name in the same sentence as Malcolm X, some guy from Canada, it's elating, and it leaves me like like it humbles me. It doesn't make
Mhm.
me arrogant. It just humbles me.
And I was gonna say, there's so many parallels with Malcolm X in your story. It's
Mm.
so many parallels. I forgot to mention that.
Okay.
And I know it's getting late for you. You're
Yeah.
2 hours
But
ahead of
I
me.
do want to say this honestly. If you look at some of the reviews, you'll see some people saying this should be a movie. The first
It
guy that
should be.
ever read my book, he's an African American, very educated, and he call me he texts me and call me like every 10 minutes. He read the book in a day and a half, and he said, "Man, bro," he says he's in Atlanta right now. He says, "Carlitos Way, my ass. Carlitos Way don't have nothing. This should be a movie."
Mhm.
And because it's a strong you've always had gangsters that were Latinos and Italians and African Americans. You never had a kid coming out of Jerusalem with this kind of thing. So hopefully one day somebody will look at it and do something with it, and I believe it's a great story to be told. Just wanted to mention that.
It changed me. It changed me. It had a huge effect on me, and it was eye opening. And I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful that I met you on TikTok. If I hadn't met you on
Likewise.
TikTok, if I hadn't popped my head on TikTok and see what the drama was about going on there and heard your voice, then I would have been privy to it. And I'm glad I did. And so I appreciate you writing this book and not letting anything stop you. It takes a lot of ambition to write a book, and you get nervous, and you get writer's block. You get You get ADHD sometimes, and I have that problem when I'm writing, where I'm like,
Yeah,
I get like a deer in the headlights, and then I got to push myself. So it's
yeah,
it's it's no joke writing a book. The
uh,
most intimidating thing you'll ever experience in your life is looking at a blank sheet of paper. I always tell people that looking at a blank sheet of paper is the most intimidating thing sometimes, because
yeah.
it's endless possibilities and all kinds of things. But I'm going to leave it on this question with you, that we didn't get to, but I want to leave it with you. I don't know if I'm off on this, but do you feel like there's going to be a revolution in the Muslim world, especially in the Middle East, amongst
Oh,
these Muslim countries?
oh, it's coming. It's absolutely coming. What's happening is something that the Muslim world has gone through. If you read the history of Islam, the Muslim world has gone through this type of thing at least 6, 7 times. When
Hmm.
Salahuddin al-Ayyubi came and took Jerusalem from the last crusade, the Muslim world was in shambles, even worse than now.
Hmm.
There's no way that I believe right now Islam had went to its lowest point and now it's on the rise again.
Hmm. I believe
Uh,
that too.
and I'm going to tell you, uh, I'm confident in things are going to change, and the people that are on top today are not necessarily going to be the people on top maybe 10 years from now. And
Yeah,
uh, and I'm going to tell you, uh, when the Muslim world has had its cleansing of its filth, uh, it's going to rise again.
I
No
believe so
different than
too.
the roaming of the children of Israel in the desert for 40 years to clean one generation for another until it was the correct generation to allow them to walk into the Holy Land. Uh, and keep them away from those who Moses saved, and they went back to worship in the calf as soon as he walked away from them. And this is the thing. Trust me, if we were where we should be, Israel wouldn't have nothing on us. But we have a lot to
Absolutely.
learn. We as Muslims and as Arabs have a lot to learn. We've lost a lot of things down along the way. And until we get those things back, to love each other as we should, to actually and truly worship God rather than materialistic world, we'll be where we were. And until then, we're gonna be where we're at. So we're to blame too, you know. I'm
Yep.
the kind of guy. I'm the kind of guy. I can't sit here and bullshit you and look in the mirror. I'll tell you about me before I tell you about anyone else,
Hmm.
and that's the way to deal with this thing. You know, I get on these lives with some of these Palestinians and they're young females and young guys, and they're 20, 30 years old, and they're gung ho and they're emotional, and they think they're going to save Palestine on TikTok by themselves. And, you know, in some cases, honestly, not to be arrogant or anything, but I forgot more than they know. But I get on, and we're supposed to be respectable to the elders. And I'm 58 years old. I'm 2 years away from being 60.
Mm.
And, you know, if you really respect Palestine and respect to liberate Palestine as a 30-year-old, when I'm speaking, and you could tell I know a little bit about what I'm speaking, you should have a little bit of respect and humbleness to be quiet. Rather, I've had where they attack me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't get mad, but it just shows you how far off we are. And I'm not saying that to say because they attacked me. I'm just saying that there's a set of etiquettes that we
Hmm.
should go by. And these are some.
Respecting your elders is synonymous in every indigenous society. Respecting your elders, and there's a wisdom behind that, because without respecting your elders, your wise elders at the very least, is because, well, the reason why it's so important is because that's the roots that go back in time to tradition and wisdom that's passed on. And when you cut that off, that's why revolution, and it's something that I haven't talked about as much, but now you bring that to mind, that intergenerational cooperation is also a vital step for a revolution. We cannot have what happened in so many other revolutions where it's just the young people throwing away all the old people's wisdom. We also have to incorporate the wisdom of the ones who suffered before we suffered, who know they know what pitfalls to avoid. They know what traps to avoid. You know, of course,
Yes.
we also have a problem with the older generation who screwed us over, like the ones like the old people in Congress who are about to keel over out of their wheelchairs. But we also have elders like yourself, the generation that came before my generation, that knows they're on the good side. They suffered under the hands of the older generation that are your peers, who are your age peers, who screwed you over, and they're about to screw us over too. So you're there to protect. It's kind of like your job to protect us younger generation from your peers who are your age, who are actively screwing us over. So I think that's a great place to leave off. Intergenerational cooperation in revolution. You
Exactly.
know, beautiful
Yeah.
place to leave off. With that being
Absolutely.
said, brother, I cannot express how much I respect you, and how much I am honored to have met you and explore your book with you. I mean, to thee, this is an honor to actually talk with the author of this book and go through the pages of it. It's a great honor, brother. So thank
I
you for coming
appreciate
on, and
it.
and I realize that I kept you up late,
No, 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 no.
but
That's no, no. You actually, brother, I appreciate you, man, and you actually went out of your way, and what you did right here, and what you do, I mean, I could speak for myself, is you actually gave me a boost. It doesn't matter how big, how high, you gave me a boost that you took your time to sit down and have a conversation with me about what I went through, my book, what I've done, what I do. And that in itself it speaks volumes for you. And I appreciate you, man.
it's a great honor, brother. It really is. And let's keep on working to free Palestine. And
Absolutely.
that being said, salam alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum
And
assalam, man. Thank you very much. Keep stay in
and
touch, man.
and as a Christian, when it comes to this Islamic revolution that is on the horizon, unlike the Crusaders, I'm at your service. I'm at all the Muslim service in this revolution. I will do whatever I can to contribute to it because,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyways,
Well,
but all right, brother.
it has, and we'll end on this. It has always been uh, never an enemy to Christianity and Judaism.
Never.
It's been those two individuals were actually the ones that brought in the Jews back to Jerusalem. Umar ibn al-Khattab and Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi,
Yep.
radiallahu anhu and rahimahullah. And again, thank you very much, big brother, and stay in touch, man, inshallah. And may God protect you and guide us all. Ameen.
Inshallah. Alhamdulillah, brother.
Alhamdulillah.
Be easy, brother. All right, I'm gonna end this. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm gonna end this recording. 3, 2, 1. Boom.